and share my screen. Welcome again to our enhancement subgroup meeting on March 4th. Today we have um, not much on the agenda, but I imagine we will really get into some discussions here. So to get started, one of the ongoing topics that we still do not have an owner for is the deprecation of the Istio in cluster operator. So this is the issue that we are using to track the technical work that is needed to make this happen. And as of now, like I said, we do not have an owner. But initially, when we decided that this is the perfect candidate for deprecation, we said that we wanted to announce the deprecation at KubeCon EU, which is coming up pretty quickly. And I wanted us to discuss this further in terms of like, oh, well, like, do we still want to announce this deprecation then? Especially since not much work has been done to own the work that's needed to replace Istio operator. And yeah, I'm curious what are everyone's thoughts. And I must say, this is something that Eric brought up, where internally they are using a steering cluster, and ideally they want to know like what's our timeline so that they can figure out like what effort is required to move away from Istio in cluster operator. And as of now, I can say we don't have a timeline because we don't have an owner, but we do want to start the conversation in terms of like, hey, this is something that will be deprecated. We actually want to put some effort into removing all documentation that points towards using Istio operator so that users do not get started there again. But it's safe to say that this has already had a soft deprecation in terms of what is the right way to do something or what is the better way to do something. It's just for us to communicate this clearly to users. Does anyone have any opinions?
I can't access the doc for some reason, but did we have any notes about like any previous discussions regarding this? I have a feeling that I think I remember Mitch saying something about this.
Yes.
I don't remember exactly what he said.
So Mitch, he's the one that actually started a spike around making sure that hemp becomes like feature has feature parity with the Istio in cluster operator. But this, I don't think he was blocked since last year and he needed some help to move forward. So I'm not sure what was that progress there. I think John said he just needed to rebase or something like that. But he's the only one who has done some work, some technical work along these lines. And then let me share
And I think
the,
that relates to the migration strategy, right, Whitney?
yes, correct.
So just to add a comment here. So if you go out and look at the Istio operator install page in the documentation, basically what we have out there says, use of the operator for new Istio installations is discouraged in favor of either using Istio Cuddle or Helm.
Yes.
While the operator will continue to be supported, new feature requests will not be prioritized. So that's sort of the way we have the documentation today.
Yeah. So we have discouraged users. And I think what
Yes,
this issue is proposing us no longer supporting it. So like really making the moves towards removing it completely from Istio.
right.
So
So to me, the deprecation story is we have sort of, as you mentioned, we sort of soft deprecated it. We're discouraging its use. But I assume what you're trying to do at this point is to, if you will, officially deprecate it, saying it will go away on such and such release, possibly.
yes.
And right. So my from an IBM standpoint is we use the operator. So my real, thing that I need to know, right, is, from their standpoint is, when does it go away? So what release can we not use it anymore? And then, is there some sort of migration strategy that, we, the SDO community, are providing or recommending? And then from an internal IBM standpoint, how does that apply to getting us off of the operator?
That makes sense. And this requires us to actually have a migration strategy well defined, which it seems like we are still spiking around. So it's really hard for us to really say this will go away by this release. So that makes me come to the opinion that we shouldn't make any further announcements in regards to Istio operator until we can move along this work, this migration strategy work. And once we have a clear owner and progress there, we can revisit what is the timeline, when will this be done, in which release, and then plan to make a announcement that is several releases before that.
Maybe a quick question around this topic. Do we know any of the vendor who is like would be really affected by this? Do we know anyone who said that they're still using and they would be affected? Do you have any data on this point?
IBM is the only vendor that raised their hand in this regard. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be curious, and I didn't ask Mitch the question directly, but I don't know if we have. I thought we had some survey documentation that has, how many, what percentage of our users might be using it. I mean, to me, the other portion of this, which isn't necessarily IBM specific, right, is how many users do we have using it, and what is our impact on them?
Yeah. And this goes back to the question of like, it's already softly deprecated. What is our motivation for actually removing support? And this is where we are stuck in this world where we don't actually move anything out of Istio.
Right. I just went and looked, right? I mean, it's tagged as beta on feature status. So we just have to go through what would be beta deprecation rules.
Yeah. And part of beta deprecation rules is to have an alternative migration strategy. Sorry, I interrupted you, Imran.
No,
Were you
no.
going to say something?
Just thinking along the lines like we do the like the feature promotion. I mean, if it makes sense, we can I can reach out to the other vendors which I know and see if we could get some data if they have it anything or at least we can ask if they have any concerns around it which make sure how well we could prioritize this. Because I see we don't have ownership to drive this. At least maybe if we put out to others, maybe they have some concerns. And
You could also ask in the broader Istio working group meeting.
yeah,
Yeah, it seems like we have to attempt to get an owner as much as possible. Yep, I like those action items.
I'd also be curious about like John and Mitch's feedback since like that issue was created by John and then Mitch did a spike. Be curious to hear the status of that.
Same, I wish Mitch was here today. But at least from the PR, I don't think there has been much progress on that. But it would be nice to get Mitch and Jen together where they can come up with like a what is needed list, or what is the final usage. Yeah.
And also, I think it would be important to just clarify the announcement question that you had with the broader group too.
That makes sense. And the consensus we came to here is that we are not going to make an announcement until we have a clear idea of like the alternative solution and a migration strategy and when that can be actually done. Yes. Perfect. Okay. And then we mentioned that we may need to do some more documentation cleanup of removing any mentions to Istio operator. I wasn't even aware this existed. So I can take it on to like do a sweep to see where else we mentioned Istio operator and um, made any changes there as well, just to make sure that our communication around this is a clear self-deprecation. Cool. Does anyone have any more thoughts on how we can move this along to actually remove support of Istio in Gluster operator with minimal impact to users?
I think that having some survey data, getting a survey out there would greatly be appreciated in the organizations that I'm working with that are using Istio, because I think most
Yeah.
of them, they are using the operator, and it's they're all very large organizations.
Okay, so there may be survey data based on what Eric mentioned, but then we can also potentially create a survey as well. Do you think we should do that, Imran? What are your thoughts there?
I think, yeah, maybe we can create a, I don't know, forum or something to, I mean, if I see that Bryce is hinting on that we should have some way to get the feedback from the users. I don't know if survey is the right way. We could, because we don't know, maybe others could be affected. Maybe we need to find a way to get feedback from the users. I think that's more, yeah, we have in control. If someone could drive it, then it's easier. You know, we need to have a mechanism to get the inputs. Right now, I don't
Yeah.
think only issues, and yeah, mostly it's issues, I believe, or something happening in the Istio meetings.
Yes, I like that. And based on what form of feedback we take, whether it's a survey, we can probably aim to have it be packaged in our next release notes. Yeah, as well as sharing the community.
Eric or Louis, do you have any like advice or tips in regards to survey and gathering feedback? 'Cause I think that's probably something that has been done before in the community. So
I think Mitch is, well, go ahead, Louis.
Yeah, I was going to say probably the same thing. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, so you know, my comment is Mitch is probably the best person to go over what surveys we have done and how pervasive they are. I was going to add that we do typically have a new survey with each release that goes out. Kind of goes along with when you install it. It throws out the link. I don't know how pervasive that is. That's sort of why I would defer to Mitch. And I don't recall if we have something in there that talks about the operator, or maybe we could add something for the operator for the 1.21 release when it comes out. And then my other comment I was going to add was, you know, we do have a deprecation section within the release announcements. So there is a section, you know, for example, for 1.21.0 when we release it, you know, deprecation, here's what we're going to deprecate. So I would assume we would want to get it in there as well. Not saying for 1.21, but for whatever release we decide that makes sense to announce the deprecation. And I'll defer to you, Louis, to see if you had any additional comments.
Nope.
thank you, Eric and Louis. Bryce, to your point earlier about the larger organizations that you work with that care about the operator, attending previous meetings, I would hear like sentiments about, you know, the fact that we can put surveys out, but we can't really force people to, you know, fill them out. I would, you know, suggest to the best of your ability, if you can like just reach out to those organizations that you know and just, you know, ask them politely to fill out the surveys when they get them to the releases, and that would be helpful.
Yeah, I have really good like faith that these organizations will give very good participation numbers. I don't think there will be any issue getting them to respond.
Perfect. Cool. I fear that we will continue discussing this until we actually get an owner as well. I think we've been dragging this along every meeting, but do you all have any thoughts in terms of like how we can really get an owner? Because I know we can continuously like surface it in the community, but if no one is interested in this work, what do we do to motivate someone? Or yeah, is that an indication that this will just stay in soft application? Personally, I'm thinking it will probably be on one of us who has bandwidth to eventually pick it up if no one else has interest. But I'm curious, like, how do we deal with this if there is no one willing to do the work and the work is necessary?
So usually right there, like there's things people want to work on and things the project needs to get done, and they fight for resources. Things the project needs to get done right now, you're just in a phase where you're kind of like this feature is convention versus ambient, right? Which is hard. Because I would say most of the most active contributors are focused on getting the ambient stuff across the line. And once that is done and things settle down, then this might actually get more attention. That's that's just the economy, right, at work. So I think what you're really waiting for is there's a moment in time when there like less economic pressure on other things, and so this can get more attention. Given that ambient is trying to get to beta in 1.22, right? I would be surprised if you can get an owner for this before then. The other lever is if some vendor has a lot of dependency on a specific outcome here, then they may be motivated to do the work. It's just I can't think of one right now.
Same. Thanks for those
Yeah, I mean, to
perspectives.
come up with somebody who, wants to get rid of the operator, right? Or,
Right.
or to come up with a decent migration strategy. I still think the migration strategy is probably the key work item, at least up front. What would that be? But trying to get somebody to step up to do that work is probably going to be more difficult at this point, as Louis was saying.
Right, and
And
most of the
from
vendors have their own installation mechanisms that they maintain, some of which are based on the operator, but many of which are not.
okay. And I'm curious, Eric, from IBM's perspective, you all know this is coming. Um, will that motivate you all to dedicate some time towards removing it and coming up with a proper migration strategy?
I would love to say yes, it would, but at this point, I don't know. I'm hearing more of, if it goes away, what are we going to do scenario, as opposed, so I guess the discussion would be more, what are we going to do if it does get deprecated and removed? How are we going to handle it? And not so much, what do we want to donate in terms of time and push forward on a good migration strategy that would help us long term. It's more of a fear of what's going to happen and not, how can we drive toward that? You know, it
There's
sort of goes, you know, this is sort of the opposite, right? Of, you know, if somebody wants something, right? So a new feature is easy to, you know, easy to get somebody to buy into and to decide to contribute for. And to come up with, you know, we want some new feature. Let's contribute for that, as opposed to, you know, unfortunately going the other way when it's like, well, now we need to try to find, you know, somebody who's motivated to make sure that, you know, the deprecation and or removal goes as they want.
Yeah, that's something that we need to figure out if we can ever figure it out. Because
Right. I mean, that's the crux of the problem. And yeah, I don't know a good solution for that. Right. I mean, because basically you're trying to say, well, we know it's going to go away. Um, how do we make it go away versus, well, if nobody provides any help and they can't get rid of it, well, we're fine. That's not the right answer necessarily. But in some ways it does work for some people. Yeah, I would love to be able to say we could provide some help in coming up with a good migration strategy. I know we've done some looking into it, but I don't know if we have a real good strategy at this point.
yeah, and I imagine what else will motivate someone is like if it becomes broken, especially if we don't contribute to it anymore and Istio diverges away from it. But I don't even know if that can be a potential case in this situation.
Right. Yeah, and the other portion of this, right, is you know, it's been mentioned, right? There's other potentially large users that are using it, and how do we necessarily interact with them to come up with what is a good migration strategy that would satisfy everyone, or at least most of the people.
Whitney, do we know which vendors are dependent on the operator?
The
With the
only
list?
the only ones we heard so far is IBM, and Bryce said some of his companies he worked with is also interested, but we don't have a list, and we are not sure what survey data we
But
have around this as well.
Bryce, those are end users. They're not ISVs.
Yes, those are, I mean, it's, so I work, on a Department of Defense project, right? And it's going to affect a ton of applications throughout the Defense Department. So.
Those are just contractual relationships. They're not through a vendored release of Istio, right? So they're just using open source Istio.
Yes.
Okay. And the alternative to use Helm, as is currently documented and now effectively recommended.
Yes.
What is those users' disposition towards that?
I think there's a gap that still has to be documented between like Helm actually becoming feature, like having feature parity with the Istio operator, and that is the only blocker in terms of officially being able to say we can migrate to Helm.
Right, and I think Mitch's work item, if I understand it correctly, is basically taking the CRD and converting it so that we have the appropriate Helm values.
And it's not clear that we actually have to have full coverage, right?
I would agree. We don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I think
That's
by
fair.
finding the answer to that and like at least documenting the gaps so that we can make a plan is probably part of the process for potentially deprecating here.
Right.
And then is a question of who will do that work. I guess we can ask Mitch since he has actually started some work along these lines. But yeah. Okay. And how do we feel about moving to the next topic? Imran, I think this is your section.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, so far I have got feedback only from Tetrate. They have gave at least a heads up that they don't have data for us to share. So it could be impossible for them to, yeah, to do the collection and then share it later perhaps. But right now it's not possible. So any update from Microsoft or from Solo? Haven't heard anything. Is there anything you or Mike have?
I believe we also don't have data to share.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe, yeah, I think it's best that we can ask for it. Maybe they can think about instrumenting for the later point in time. Maybe later we could get at some point, at least for the new ones.
Yes, I agree. I think one of the efforts here was to really see what vendors we have in the community and how we can leverage that for data moving forward on features. And at least from the Microsoft standpoint, it has made us think of like how we want to instrument our offering to make sure we can get data that can be helpful when making feature decisions in upstream.
Yeah, I think that's the message I got from TechTet as well. So yeah, like the ones we are discussing with this history operator. So we don't have data to reach out exactly, but yeah. So I'll proceed on with the next task probably.
So just generally on that point, as far as I know, Google certainly instruments API usage for their SaaS product, but not for on-premise. I don't know or haven't heard that IBM or Microsoft are instrumenting API usage currently in production for their solutions. Eric, do you know, does IBM instrument API usage?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Google is the only one who gave us data
Right,
as well, so that makes
yeah,
sense.
because I think they're the only one doing it. If you want, so the only way, like within Solo, and I think it's true for most companies that are shipping distributions that companies run, i.e. things that are not SaaS, because the terms of data privacy with those companies would make them, it's just very instrumentation that getting the customer to explicitly run tooling or spending a lot of time with a lawyer, which, having helped build the one at Google, it required spending a lot of time with a lawyer. So we can either just rely on Google's data or we can ask for ANIC data, but then the questions have to be very coarse, right? Or you could ask a field engineering or professional services organization how often they use this API, or do they see it used in production? And they can give you a kind of high, medium, and low indicative, but they can't give you precise instrumentation.
I feel this is like a general issue that we encounter in terms of like getting feedback from users and usage. I know from the open source side of things, we never explored like actually instrumenting usage because that's hard to do. I don't know if there may be an opportunity for us to provide guidance for like our vendors and end users on
So
how
we
they
have
can
actually
contribute. Yep.
explored open source instrumenting. We were waiting for the CNCF to provide a legal framework for doing it. I think there has actually been some progress on that front, but, or at least there's some precedent now for how projects within the CNCF could do that within a, because you need some assessment of privacy, right? But there is some precedent now. I don't remember what it was called. Somebody mentioned it to me about 6 months ago. I think it was Mitch actually, who was looking at that as part of surveys. And so that may actually become quite a hot and useful thing to look at for the project as a whole, and might get some attention once the ambient stuff cools down, I guess.
That's good news, though. I'm happy to hear that there's a precedent for it.
I'll
And then now
check with, yeah,
it's
it's at least been discussed. You might want to check with Mitch on the details, but I think there is something. It's still probably something you would have to get users to opt into. And Bryce, I'm willing to bet your DoD customers would not opt into that just by default. Because unless they understand the legal ramifications, you just don't turn something on, right?
No, yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
okay. That's something we can follow up on, especially as we need data. We really do.
Yeah.
So that's all of the items we have on the agenda today. Anyone else wants to bring up something else? If not, we can call the meeting early. Thank you everyone for coming out and participating. And I will see you on the next one. Bye everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.